But with that said, let's transition over to something. This is the last segment of this. Spider-Man movies ranked. And this is only going to be like 15 minutes. I did want to talk about it because now that I've talked infusively about Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, I do want to take a second and just talk about all Spider-Man content and the films and their meaning in this. So let's just start. There's 13. That includes the Raimi trilogy, Mark Webb's True Films, the Watch trilogy, the MCU films. I'm not including the movies where Spider-Man is in them, but not really a central character. So films like Civil War, Infinity War, Endgame, they're just fully out. Uh, I'm counting the Venom films. I'm counting Morbius. I'm counting the Spider-Verse films. So, starting at 13, and this should be no surprise due to the quality of this film and the fact that this main actor is trying to convince everybody that he is still a good actor. And for some reason, Hollywood is still buying it. He's a really bad actor. He's a terrible human being. I don't like this guy for a lot of reasons, but it's Morbius. Jared Leto's really bad on this. It's a really lame hero to adapt. There's nothing interesting about this film. Bad special effects, lame direction throughout, lazy sequel setup. This film is so much more interested in setting up a Sinister Six movie with this pointless Michael Keaton cameo at the end. It feels like the movie is kind of grinding gears to eventually get there. It's so unoriginal. The plot is so cliched. It's poorly paced at an hour and 40. It feels like 2 hours and 30. There's nothing interesting about this film outside of Matt Smith, who almost understands the comedic stupidity of this film and is trying to make something good of this film, but ultimately Jared Leto just tanks this film. There's nothing interesting about his performance. This is a bad film. 1.1 star for me for Morbius, in case you don't remember my Morbius suckiest review, as I called it. Number 12 is Venom. And I should just state, Morbius is the only one I downright hate. These other movies I have moments of enjoyment with. And in Venom, I find this film to be trashy yet fun. Tom Hardy is clearly having a blast with this dual role. The humor works to pretty good effects. I find the film to be a little bit too funny, like it's a little bit too broad in its comedic sensibilities, but Tom Hardy is so committed to this role of playing both of them in this duality that it worked for me well enough. The villain is bad. They wasted Riz Ahmed. The special effects are horrible. This final third act where it's just these kind of two blobs fighting each other just looks really boring. But when you really are focusing in on the Venom dynamic, just Tom Hardy kind of just going 100% crazy, I actually do enjoy that aspect of the film. Like I said, the CGI fight scenes of this movie are terrible. This film does the ultimate sin where it just wastes the great actress in Michelle Williams, as this is a sequel. She's just completely wasted in this film, though. Number 11 is The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Here's the thing. I defend this movie due to the excellent romantic chemistry between Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone, but it's not a good movie. This film struggles with the three villains, and none of them are intimidating. You have, off the top of my head, you have Electro played by Jamie Foxx, Green Goblin played by Dane DeHaan, who I've always said is not a good actor, and time has seemed to bear that truth to existence. And you have, I believe it's Paul Giamatti who plays the Rhino. I believe it's Giamatti in this role. None of them are good. Dane DeHaan is a bad actor. Mark Webb, as the director of this film, just struggles with the cinematic aspects of this movie. But this is also the guy who directed 500 Days of Summer. He does understand the visual cues of romance in this film, thus the relationship and the interpersonal relationship between Gwen Stacy and Peter Parker actually shines in this film to really great effects. Uh, Again, I don't necessarily love how this movie looks, but I do love Andrew Garfield in the role. He does embody Spider-Man to really good effects in it. I just, some of the lines he has, some of the just caringness he has in this role. Uh, there's this weird subplot in both these Amazing Spider-Man films where it's the Peter's parents are they're working for like the CIA or something. We spend like a good amount of time focused on this, but the ending of this film is legitimately great. The Gwen Stacy recreation of her death from Spider-Man 129, I did just find really moving. It really works. Andrew Garfield really sells this movie. There is just a lot to like about this movie. It's just the fact that the villains goes nowhere. This film kind of is just churning its wheels, but it doesn't really ever find traction. But there are things to be liked about this movie. Coming in at number 10. Sorry, I need a water break. Coming in at number 10 is Venom Let There Be Carnage. First off, I just want to say that Woody Harrelson in this movie is just a bizarre casting. He has the stupidest like Annie wig on of this red hair. It looks so comedically over the top, as is the rest of the movie. And that's kind of why I kind of give this movie a pass. It's 90 minutes and it just kind of flies by. And I just was left this movie just kind of just on board for what it was. It is so Tom Hardy and Woody Harrelson chewing the scenery. It doesn't really make any logical sense. I don't really remember scenes of this movie. I remember the beginning to be a little self-serious with this carnage, his like girlfriend being killed. I don't like any of that, but I do like that this completely over the top nature about it. It's kind of stupidity and chaos just encompassed in this movie. Andy Serkis, the guy who plays Gollum, and Caesar and just this amazing actor directs this movie for some reason. I didn't know he even had an interest in directing, and he hasn't, from my understanding, I don't think he's directed a movie since. I think he's directed two films. He's directed that Mowgli movie from the Jungle Book that went to Netflix a few years ago. I believe he's director of this, and he directed this movie. Doesn't really need to be directed by him. Actually, in fact, he might have been a better Carnage than Woody Harrelson. But I can't really say anything negative about this movie. Watching this movie for 90 minutes, I'm like, okay, this is fun. I'm having fun with this movie. I can't say it's great, but I had fun watching this. And for 90 minutes, it's just the perfect amount of stupidity and chaos. I kind of was able to turn my brain off and just have a blast with this movie, weirdly enough. And it's just, again, it's so trashy, but it's trashy in a fun way. And I was just able to respect that and that Tom Hardy is fully going. If Tom Hardy's at a 10 in the first movie, he's at like a 20 in the second movie. He's a lot of fun in this role. The stupid like setup for them being into No Way Home is really dumb because it's just a post-credit scene that really all it's setting up is that the symbiote now exists in Tom Holland's world. You could have done it in a more interesting way. It's a stupid post-credit scene and it feels like it's going to be more impactful. I don't think we'll ever see those two characters interact. Coming in at number 9 is the Amazing Spider-Man. The most memorable part of this movie is the romantic chemistry between Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone. I like the Captain Stacy storyline. Weirdly enough, when this movie came out in 2012, I was on a huge Dennis Leary kick for some reason, and I really liked him as Captain Stacy. Uh, I already talked about how Mark Webb's talents as a director don't necessarily lend themselves to Spider-Man cinematically, but it does lend itself to the interpersonal relationships that Spider-Man has in this film. Uh, there is this nature of it where I do find Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker to be a little bit too stalkerish to Emma Stone, so I don't necessarily like how they get together in this film. It doesn't feel as natural as it does in Amazing Spider-Man 2, but their chemistry really sells this. I think he captures the duality of Spidey in this movie in the sense that you really do feel the difference of Peter Parker and Spider-Man in this film. Uh, Specifically with the humor, the romance, and Spidey's heroism in this film. One of my favorite scenes is the scene where he saves the kid from the falling bridge, giving him the mask. It's a the cranes at the end where they're all helping out Spider-Man. It's one of my favorite moments within Spider-Man history. I don't love the look of Peter Parker in this film. I don't like this skater aesthetic that Mark Webb decides to use with this movie. And I think the tone of the movie is very scatterbrained, very serious at times, very funny at times. It all kind of feels a little disconnected. And I don't think this movie does enough to distinguish itself from Raimi's. And specifically, it kind of feels like a retread of the first Spider-Man movie directed by Sam Raimi. Except they had this dumb subplot, which I already mentioned with Peter Parker's parents. But overall, I do have fun with this movie. I think there are things to like about this movie. It's just never really warrants its existence. But I do like, you see the potential of Andrew Garfield being a great Peter Parker slash Spider-Man. It's just the film never gets there quite with him. Coming in at number 8, this one's actually grown in my appreciation, as has this whole trilogy. It's Spider-Man 3. And listen, I'll just acknowledge this. The plot is a mess in this movie, but I actually do find the story to be rich. It's just the plot itself is kind of just all over the place. It's Spider-Man at his heights and thus his hubris, and it's an exploration of grudges, generational trauma, trying to overcome your past. That's really the Harry storyline of this. I don't think James Franco is good in any of these movies, to be honest. I like Tobey Maguire a lot in this movie specifically. Uh, and I think this film looks great. I think what Sam Raimi is really good at is he's a really good visual storyteller. and his movies look exceptional. I think this movie is no exception. I think this movie looks quite good. Uh, Obviously, there's this meme-ness of this movie, which has been now meme to death, the emo Spider-Man. Here's what I will say, this movie is playing it completely self-aware. This is intentionally funny. The scene where Eddie Brock is in the church praying for Spider-Man's death, or sorry, Peter Parker's death, is so obviously comedic. It does suffer from too many villains, and James Franco, who again I just don't think is good in this role at all, and specifically his Harry Osborn, that storyline doesn't work. But there is a lot of just rich storytelling themes of this movie. I really do like this idea of getting to see Peter Parker not struggle, but just struggle with almost his self image, his relationship with MJ, kind of being kicked down. It really does work for me. Him in the black suit works to really good effects. There is a lot to like about this movie. It never really comes together. Again, it's the weakest of this trilogy, but there are moments to really like in this film. And I think it does require an actually exceptional performance from Tobey Maguire that's kind of overlooked now just due to the memes of it. Coming in at number 7, I have this film much lower than a lot of other people have. It's the first installment of Spider-Man within the MCU, Spider-Man Homecoming. And let's just straight up say this is a 3 out of 5 star movie for me. I like this movie, but it does feel off for me. Something about this movie doesn't necessarily gel for me. I don't love how it looks, and this is one of my biggest issue with the John Watts films. They look very generic. I don't like the humor in certain sequences. There are just jokes in this movie that I find a little bit just too annoying or too poppy or too jokey, which is kind of weird in a Spider-Man film, but it is like very like kiddish at times, and it just like there are moments of it where the humor just completely loses me on the film, and I find it more annoying than funny. Uh, Keaton is good in this movie. Michael Keaton is really good as the Vulture, but the problem is I like him more as Adrian than in the actual costume. When he's in the costume, I do find boring. I find this film to be very weightless in its gravity. Like there are just scenes of this film where I just don't really love how this film looks. Like again, watching the Rainey films recently, you notice the crashes, you notice the explosions, you notice like the impact of everything. In this, it just kind of feels weightless throughout, and it's just one of my big issues with Watts as a director. Again, I think he directs the story of the movie very well. It's just he doesn't have an eye for the cinematic nature of Spider-Man storytelling. And that is a downfall of this movie. And I think it's most noticeable. I do think as the film goes on, his skills do improve. Again, I'm not going to put him at the height of maybe Sam Raimi or some other the directors within the Marvel Cinematic Universe or in superhero storytelling in general, but I do think he does improve. Specifically in my next entry, which is number 6, which is Spider-Man Far From Home, which is unlike where I dislike Spider-Man Homecoming a little bit more than other people. I actually really overvalue Far From Home more than most people. I seem to be more on the positive on this movie than some people. And what I do love about this movie is Mysterio. Mysterio is the movie to me, and John Watts, what he is able to capture so well about Mysterio is the cinematic nature of this movie. The scene where you see the hundreds of Mysterio walking through, you see these illusions, these grandeur of the Mysterio character. That really works for me. And I love that this story is really Peter trying to get the girl. I love MJ having a bigger role in this movie. In the first movie, I was very confused by the MJ decision within this film to not really focus it on her thing and to introduce MJ in the second film. I I really like this movie for just the MJ relationship, have her having a bigger role. I think Mysterio again lends himself to the big screen. I think this is a movie about Endgame and like trying to overcome the death of Tony Stark and him trying to become his own person. And I like how it follows up Endgame in a very respectable way. And like I said, I think Tom Holland grows with each role. Some storylines I don't necessarily vibe with. The Ned romance I actually do find quite funny. I do think the jokes work in this. I don't love the Nick Fury storyline throughout this. I do think the Nick Fury just part with Maria Hill is just all kind of wasted. But overall, I really do just like this movie, and it is really just centered around Jake Gyllenhaal's Mysterio. I think the ending is just exceptional. I lost my mind when you saw J.K. Simmons in this. I really had a fun time with this movie. I don't think it's as bad as many people say it is. Coming in at number 5 for me is a movie that's actually slightly dropped, but more because some of the other films I've seen have actually grown in my appreciation, and that's Spider-Man 2002, the first Sam Raimi film. And here's the thing, I have an emotional attachment to this film. I have just scenes from this movie, beats from this movie, just completely memorized. I just know this movie inside and out. Defoe is kind of the quintessential Spider-Man villain for me, and he's when I think of the live action Spider-Man villains, he's who I think of first. I just even as dumb as the costume looks, I like him in this role. Uh, New York looks so lively in this film. Sam Raimi has such an eye for the cinematic of this film. This web swinging, there's just so many shots of just how the camera moves that it's just the camera becomes a character, as the camera always becomes a character in Sam Raimi films. The camera becomes a character in this. I love that Sam Raimi translates his horror vibes into this. I think that works so well when you have an actor like Willem Dafoe who is so expressive in his face. You just really get some really disturbing visual cues in this movie. There's a jump scare in this movie, like somewhere pretty in the middle, that still scares me. It still actually gives me goosebumps thinking about. And to be honest, when I think Spider-Man movies, this is still the movie that I think of. This is the first Spider-Man movie I ever saw. This is one of the earliest movies I remember actually ever seeing. And I love this film for that. It is just the case of there's now been films that have been done better than this, but I still just have an appreciation for this film and a love for this. I think Kirsten Dunst is good in this movie. I think Tobey Maguire again grows. I think he's best in Spider-Man 2. James Franco is probably the best he's been of the three, but again, I think he's miscast as Harry Osborn in this film. Coming in at number 4, this one was a hard one. I switched back and forth, but ultimately, after rewatching one of these films today, I decided I'm going to put that one above this one. And thus, coming in at number 4 is Spider Man No Way Home, a movie I love. Just like before we go into number 4, I know it sounds a little lower than some of these other movies. I love Spider Man No Way Home. And listen, John Watts does have this airless nature in his direction where I've said it. I don't necessarily like how these MCU films look. They don't always look cinematic. That can be really clear in the first half of this movie where there's just scenes of New York where they just don't feel lived in. You can really feel the back lot studio of this film, the backdrop of it. It feels very CGI in scenes. What this movie does so well is the second half of this movie, and that's where this movie really climbs in my appreciation for it. Obviously, having all three of the Spider-Man, I think it actually does lend itself in a way that doesn't feel. Here's the thing: this film is clearly building off the success of Into the Spider-Verse, and they're like, "Oh, what if we can do this?" I don't think if Into the Spider-Verse was as big of a deal as it was, I don't think we actually get this movie. I think they do reshape this movie in honor of the success that Into the Spider-Verse found. But I do really like the Andrew Garfield, Tobey Maguire edition from this movie. And I do think they don't distract from Tom Holland. This does feel like a Tom Holland story. The death of MJ, sorry, not the death of MJ, sorry, the death of Aunt May, all this kind of his origin story, him coming to be Spider-Man, him by the end of this being the Spider-Man, the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man that we truly know, a broke kid trying to make it through this world. That all really worked for me. Again, it's this issue of this movie and why it drops a little bit lower for me is I know how Spider-Man I know the beats of this movie very well, is what I should actually say. And the reason I watched this movie is the second half of this movie. The first half I don't really revisit. The Doctor Strange stuff is good, but it's not like anything particularly memorable. It's when it all kind of comes together, when you get the Sinister Sticks, when you get them all together, when you get the Spider-Man, that's when this movie really sings, and I think it's really special. Coming in at number 3 then is the best of the live action Spider-Man movies. It should be obvious if I just said that, but that is Spider-Man 2. When I was watching this movie, so I always really undervalued Spider-Man 2. And what's so great about this movie specifically is the cinematic language that Sam Raimi is working with. This might be his best directed film in terms of looks. There's one sequence in this film where you see Spider-Man swinging, and then you see it in the reflection of Doc Ock's glasses, and it's this just beautiful transition. There's so much of this. Again, the camera, like in Spider-Man 1 and 3, is a character within this film. Just so much about this movie. This movie hits me on a really emotional core. This is Spider-Man being beat down and beat down and beat down, and yet he still succeeds in being the Spider-Man movie. This movie just starts with him getting his ass kicked in the sense that he is Peter Parker and he gets fired from his job as a pizza delivery boy. He is not making money. He needs money desperately, and he's never getting it. And just in all of that, there's just this nature of Peter Parker. And I always used to criticize that I never found Tobey Maguire funny. These movies are actually quite funny. There is a great just humor that Sam Raimi is able to infuse in this movie. I think I've given Tobey Maguire a little bit too much crap in the past. He is good and he does do that dual role very well. But what makes the film memorable are sequences, the character relationships in this movie. As I always say, that's one of the most important things about Spider-Man. Uh, Specifically, some of the scenes. I love the scene where uh, the landlord's daughter offers Spider-Man a piece of cake, just this little act of kindness. I love the scene with Aunt May and Peter Parker, and Peter Parker's telling her that he was there the night Ben was killed and it was his fault, and then May's forgiveness of it later on in the movie. The Doc Ock always trying to do better. Doc Ock sacrificing himself at the end. These conversations that he has with MJ. The final shot of MJ. You know, the movie Spider-Man 2 ends with MJ for a very specific reason. And it's her kind of accepting like her role in all of this and just what is going to essentially happen to her. Like she now realizes it's a sense of danger. And the story is to some degree MJ's story as well as it is Peter Parker's, and their relationship is so well explored in this movie. Again, Harry Osborn is rough in this movie. I've already iterated I don't like James Franco in this role. Doc Ock is a really exceptional villain. There are a few scenes in this movie that legitimately make me cry. Two of the ones that just break me are obviously the one that everyone thinks of is the train sequence where he saves the train. They lift his body and they're looking at Peter and they're like, he's a kid. He could be my kid. Like that scene, and then the mask, and then them all rallying around him and saying, we'll keep your identity safe. The kid's giving the mask. I'm tearing up thinking about that scene. And then like when Doc Ock comes on the train and they're all standing in front, basically, if you're not getting to Spider-Man without going through us, my God, that movie's so beautiful. The scene that I kind of forgot about the scene, but it's such a great scene. It's after he's kind of given up the role of Spider-Man. He sees the burning house and it puts him back into action. It's just the heroism of Spider-Man. It's just in his blood. That's what makes Peter Parker, is that he kind of just can't sit and see this happening. He has to put the sacrifice in. And the scene where he saves the little child, he gives the child, he walks away without a moment's notice. And then this next scene where they're just like, the cops or the firefighters are talking and they're like, this guy died in the building. It's just such a throwaway line, but you just kind of see the impact that has on Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. And maybe he's thinking like, could I have done more? Could I have done more? It's so just all expertly achieved. I love this film. I really did just vibe with this movie so well. And it's maybe because I've been studying Sam Raimi for the past year and I've really grown in my appreciation for his love for him. Number 2 on my list is at this moment Across the Spider-Verse. For all the reasons I just mentioned, I think this film is masterful. I think it's a 5-star movie. Just everything about this movie really works. The only reason it is not number 1, and again, I'm not talking about Across the Spider-Verse in any more detail. If you want to watch that, you can either watch the other video or watch the beginning of this hour conversation. Number 1, though, is the movie that I called the movie of the 2010s decade. My favorite movie to come out of that decade is Into the Spider-Verse. So many reasons that this film is brilliant. The comedy of this film, John Mulaney, Nicolas Cage really just bringing it. The story, What's Up Danger, that drop, the leap of faith is one of the best moments of this film, just of film making ever. Just point blank. The music works so brilliantly in this film. The needle drops are fantastic. But also what this movie works about is every character feels fully realized. I love this moment with Jake Johnson voicing Peter B. Parker. where he's talking about his past and how MJ and him have separated. And it's this line that Jake Johnson delivers so beautifully where he's like, she wanted to have kids and I was scared. And that's all you really need to know about that character. And it's just so emotionally impactful. So many of the scenes in this movie are emotionally impactful. And it's just casting talented actors like Mahershala Ali is a credit to this movie. It lends itself. So when the Prowler dies in this movie and he's Spider-Man, you're the best of all of us. Or Miles, you're the best of all of us. It's just so much of it just works to such beautiful effect. I love the villain in this movie, Kingpin, and specifically Liv Octavius, voiced by Catherine Hahn, who I think is exceptional in this role. Just all of this film is a visual language of itself. It's groundbreaking to me, and I just didn't know a film could do what this film does until I saw it. And I just will never, I don't think Across the Spider-Verse can touch this because I can't get over seeing this film for the first time. And that's my relationship with this movie. And I love Into the Spider-Verse as I love Across the Spider-Verse, but it's just this movie's so special to me. And I don't know if you can ever replace that excitedness I had from watching this movie for the first time.